The mob can say anything at all about you or your thoughts online, despite your hard-earned reputation. And there is nothing you can do about it. Any member of what can far too easily become a mob can level any accusation, no matter how slanderous, against anyone at all, for any reason. And there is little or nothing that the target can do in response. Perhaps most worrisome of all is the fact that this incited rage bleeds over into the real world. All the impotent anger generated is externalized away from the social network and dispersed. Thus, the ambient emotional temperature of general society is raised, degree by degree, to the boiling point. Malignant narcissism. We know this instinctively, but it would be easy to test. An ambitious PhD student, in case one's listening, could expose one group to Twitter for half an hour, another randomly established to another social media network, and a third, if desired, to a reading task. All study participants could then be assigned, say, a competitive aggression research task to determine if Twitter exposure heightens the proclivity to respond in kind with punishment to provocation. I believe that Twitter's reward structure, even more than Facebook's, incentivizes malignant narcissism. It enables and benefits free riding and prioritizes psychopathic motivation. And it garners disproportionate attention in doing so, capitalizing on the attractiveness of outrageous behavior, while externalizing all the associated and inevitable costs to the innocent, broader society. This is the psychological equivalent of the tragedy of the commons, the psychological equivalent to pollution of the air we all breathe. I recently spoke about all this to the author of the article I mentioned previously, psychologist Jonathan Haidt, and on the same email string to Steven Pinker, the eminent cognitive psychologist. How did my psychologist colleagues react? Haidt noted that Twitter indeed cuts the link between, quote, competence or value creation and prestige/reward. Pinker likewise observed, quote, the contrast between Twitter and face-to-face communication is profound. I have been astounded at how some of my students and younger colleagues think nothing of spitting utterly gratuitous and unjustified snark at respected figures in their fields. I have to remind them that they may meet these figures at a conference someday, or that they might be on their tenure or grant review committees. The transition from meetings to Zoom in the past 2 years may have exacerbated this. But I suspect the main enabler is the sense that their reference group is their Twitter same-age peers, and that they don't have cues reminding them they're part of a multi-generational community. Pinker added, quote, there also seems to be a dynamic of weaponizing social justice so that as our society legitimately expands rights for black people, women, gay people, and transgender people, it simultaneously creates weapons for sociocultural warfare, handing aggressive professionals a moralistic cudgel with which they can demonize their competitors. In this case, destructive trolling could also be a side effect of moral progress. Note that this would be consistent with the appeal of moralistic mobbing among younger generations. In status competitions with their seniors, they are disadvantaged along every dimension but one, claimed moral superiority. End quote. How much are our social media networks, these massively broad-scale social experiments conducted with radically insufficient knowledge of the underlying psychological dynamics, incentivizing narcissism, an idea that particularly appealed to Dr. Haidt? And how much is too much? Here's an uncomfortable conclusion. It does not take that many free riders or criminals or people who simply just don't care. And who would just as soon see everything burn, to radically destabilize complex social organizations. I spoke recently with the journalist Andy No about the anarchist group Antifa, for example, after being informed by some Democrats I was corresponding with that this group, Antifa, didn't really exist. I didn't know what they meant until I asked Andy how many truly active Antifa cells he thought existed in the US, and how many active full-time equivalent members each cell might have. He thought 40 cells with 20 members each. That's 800. All that damage from 800 anarchists. That's the Pareto principle. A small number of agents in any organization, or its equivalent, pull all the weight. It's worth remembering that 1% of the US population accounts for 2/3 of all violent crime, and that a minority of that 1% are repeat offenders, exacerbating polarization. Have we built so-called communication systems that are capable of destabilizing our entire society? Haidt believes that it was the mere introduction of the retweet and like buttons that facilitated the tit-for-tat sharing of emotionally triggering content, particularly that capable of generating outrage. If a tech innovation that small can exacerbate polarization on a societal scale, how much disruption can these communication technologies, taken as a whole, create? Enough to bring us down? The mental health data certainly indicate that a major toll has already been taken on female adolescents. What about the rest of us? What about our social institutions? It seems clear that the potential psychological and sociological harm engendered by the increasingly monopolistic communication enterprises engaging our society are such that we should at least consider a push to conduct research on the matter, with an eye to conceptualizing, designing, and improving social media sharing platforms that aren't prima facie insane and contagiously so. We must do so before our new and in some ways miraculous mass communication systems pollute the social world beyond repair.